Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Tonight I've got some absolutely wild Reddit stories for you. Alright, let's jump into the first story. So this happened about 6 months ago, and I'm still processing whether I was completely out of line, or if my family has lost their minds. I'm 28, my brother is 32, and we've always had this weird competitive thing going on. Not in a healthy sibling rivalry way, more like he needs to one-up everything I do. I got a promotion, he got a better one 2 weeks later, according to him. I bought a car, his lease is somehow superior. You get the idea. Anyway, I got engaged to my now wife about a year ago. We planned a small wedding, about 80 people, nothing crazy. My brother wasn't engaged at the time. We set our date for June, sent saved the dates in January, everything normal. Then in February, my brother suddenly announces he's engaged. Cool. Whatever. I was genuinely happy for him. Here's where it gets weird. 3 weeks after our save the dates went out, my brother sent his. Same year, same month, same weekend. His wedding is literally the day before mine. At first I thought it was a mistake. I called him and I was like, "Hey man, I think there's been a mix-up with your date." And he just goes, "Nope, that's our date. We really wanted a June wedding." I reminded him that my wedding is the next day. He said, "Yeah, it'll be a fun wedding weekend for the family." I asked if he could maybe move it by even 1 week. He said they'd already put down deposits. I checked. They'd been engaged for 3 weeks. No way they had unmovable deposits that fast. My parents got involved and basically told me I was being selfish for not being happy about a wedding weekend. My mom actually said, "This way we can celebrate both of you." I pointed out that half our guest list overlaps. People would have to choose. And also I sent my save the dates first. My dad said I was being petty and that it's just 1 day. My fiance and I decided we weren't moving our date. We'd been planning for months. My brother didn't move his either. So we had dueling weddings on consecutive days. And guess what happened? About 40% of our mutual guests chose his wedding, including 2 of my groomsmen who dropped out last minute. One of them told me, "Your brother's venue is nicer and it's an open bar. Sorry, man." My wedding was still beautiful, smaller than planned, but the people who showed up were the ones who actually cared about us. My brother's wedding was apparently this massive thing with ice sculptures and a live band. My parents spent the entire time at my reception talking about how amazing his wedding was the night before. The kicker? 2 months later, my brother and his wife separated. Turns out they rushed the wedding specifically to overshadow mine, and they hadn't actually worked through any of their relationship issues. They're divorced now. My parents still think I should have just moved my date. So Reddit, was I the jerk for not rescheduling my wedding when my brother picked the day before? Let's jump into the next one. I used to work at a mid-size marketing firm, one of those places that calls itself a family, but treats you like disposable labor. My boss, let's call her Sandra, was the type of manager who needed to control every single aspect of every project. I'm talking about editing your emails before you send them, sitting in on every client call, and literally tracking how many minutes you spend in the bathroom. I'm a graphic designer, been doing it for 8 years, and I'm pretty good at my job. But Sandra treated me like an intern. Every design I made, she'd tear apart. Not because it was bad, but because she needed to feel important. She'd make me change colors for no reason, move text boxes 1 pixel to the left, swap fonts that were basically identical. It was exhausting. The breaking point came when I was working on a huge campaign for a car company. I spent 3 weeks on this design. The client loved it in the preliminary meeting. I was proud of it. Sandra called me into her office and said the design was fine, but she wanted to make some adjustments. She then proceeded to change literally everything. Different color scheme, different layout, different fonts, different images. It was essentially a completely new design. Her design was objectively worse, but she pulled rank and sent it to the client. The client hated it. They said it didn't match their brand and asked if we could go back to the original concept. Sandra, in front of the entire team, blamed me. She said I must have sent the wrong file and that I needed to be more careful. I pulled up the email chain showing she'd sent it herself, and she told me to stop making excuses. That's when I decided to follow her rules exactly. Sandra had this policy that every single decision needed her approval. Every color choice, every font, every image placement, every word of copy. She claimed it was for quality control. So I started actually doing that. Before, I'd make judgment calls on small stuff and just update her on the big things. Now, I asked about everything. Sandra, should this button be round or square? Sandra, should this be Arial or Helvetica? Sandra, should there be 2 spaces after this period or 1? Sandra, the client wants blue, but didn't specify which blue. Can you tell me the exact hex code you want? I'd send her 20 to 30 emails a day. I'd knock on her office door every hour. In meetings, I'd defer every question to her. That's a great question, but Sandra makes those decisions. Let me ask her. I stopped using any initiative. If she didn't explicitly tell me to do something, I didn't do it. At first, she loved it. She thought I was finally respecting her authority. Then projects started missing deadlines because she couldn't keep up with approving every tiny decision. Clients started complaining that communication was slow. Other designers saw what I was doing and started doing it too. Within a month, Sandra was drowning in approval requests. She called a team meeting and said we needed to be more self-sufficient and stop bothering her with every little thing. I very politely reminded her that she'd implemented the approval policy to ensure quality control, and I was just following company policy. She couldn't really argue without admitting her system was broken. She tried to write me up for inefficient work habits, but HR pointed out I was following the procedures she'd mandated. Eventually, the company did an internal review because so many projects were delayed, and they found that Sandra's micromanagement was the bottleneck. She got moved to a different department with no direct reports, and we got a new manager who actually trusts us to do our jobs. I'm still at the company, and my new boss is fantastic. Sandra avoids eye contact with me in the hallway. Best revenge I ever got. All right, next story coming up. Getting married was supposed to be the happiest time of my life, and it mostly was, except for one person who tried very hard to ruin it, my mother-in-law. Let me give you some context. My husband is an only child, and his mom has always been weirdly possessive of him. Not in a sweet, that's my baby way, more like a, no woman will ever be good enough for my son way. From the moment we got engaged, she made it clear she wasn't thrilled. She didn't say it directly, but there were comments. Are you sure you're ready for marriage? You're both so young. We're both 29. I just hope you know what you're getting into. Classic stuff. Wedding planning was a nightmare because she insisted on being involved in everything, then hated every choice we made. Our venue was too modern. Our flowers were too simple. Our menu was too exotic, even though we were literally serving chicken and fish. She wanted us to use her wedding dress designer. She wanted input on the guest list. She wanted a say in our vows. My husband, bless him, tried to set boundaries, but she'd guilt trip him about how she's his mother and just wants to help. About 2 months before the wedding, I went dress shopping with my bridesmaids and my mom. My mother-in-law asked to come. I said yes because I was trying to keep the peace. Big mistake. I found my dream dress, a classic A-line with lace sleeves, nothing too dramatic. I was in love with it. My bridesmaids were crying, my mom was crying. It was a whole moment. My mother-in-law said, "It's nice, but have you considered something more flattering? You want to look your best." I ignored her and bought the dress. A week before the wedding, my husband mentioned that his mom had bought her dress for the ceremony and wanted to show us. I figured this was just normal mother of the groom stuff. She came over and pulled out a white dress. Not cream, not ivory, not champagne. White, bright white, with a lace overlay and a subtle train. I just stared at it. My husband said, "Mom, you can't wear white to a wedding." She acted shocked. "Oh, this isn't white. It's more of a pearl color." It was white. We could all see it was white. She insisted it was fine and that she'd already had it tailored and it was too late to return it. I very calmly told her that wearing white to someone else's wedding is considered disrespectful and I'd really appreciate it if she chose a different dress. She said I was being dramatic and that things are different now, and it's not the 1950s. My husband backed me up, and she left in a huff. The day of the wedding, I was in the bridal suite, getting ready, when one of my bridesmaids came running in. "Your mother-in-law's here, and she's wearing the white dress." I looked out the window, and sure enough, there she was, in the white dress, greeting guests like she was the bride. I was about to lose it, but my maid of honor had a better idea. She went to the venue coordinator and explained the situation. The coordinator, who was an absolute legend, went up to my mother-in-law and very loudly said, "Excuse me, ma'am. I think there's been a mistake. The bride is already here. You must be confused." Then she very sweetly but firmly escorted her back to her car to fix the mix-up. My mother-in-law called my husband in a rage, but he didn't answer because we had a no phones rule during the ceremony prep. By the time she got back to the venue, in a navy blue dress she apparently had in her car as a backup, the ceremony had already started and she had to sneak into the back row. The whole wedding, she sulked. She barely smiled in photos. During the mother-son dance, she told my husband that I'd humiliated her. He told her she'd humiliated herself. We've been married for 2 years now, and she still brings it up at family gatherings. "Remember when I wasn't allowed to wear my dress to the wedding?" My husband shuts it down every time. Apparently she'd planned the whole thing because she thought if she wore white, it would make a statement about how she's losing her son. Joke's on her, because now we only see her on major holidays. Next up, let's get into this one. This is mortifying, but also kind of hilarious looking back on it. I work in corporate finance, very buttoned up environment. Lots of serious people in suits talking about quarterly reports. I'm relatively junior, so I mostly keep my head down and try not to embarrass myself. That strategy worked great until the day I became infamous for the worst reply all in company history. So our company has about 600 employees across multiple offices. Every week, the CEO sends out a company-wide email with updates, wins, announcements, the usual corporate stuff. Most people skim it or ignore it, but you're supposed to read it because sometimes there's actually important info buried in there. One Monday morning, the CEO sends the weekly email. The subject line was something like, "Weekly update, Q3 goals, and team wins." I was half asleep, drinking my coffee. Barely paying attention. I skimmed through it. The email mentioned that the executive team had approved renovations for the break room, including a new coffee machine. Now here's the thing. Our office coffee was terrible. I'm talking burnt, watery, possibly made from dirt. Everyone complained about it constantly. So when I read that we were getting a new machine, I got excited and immediately texted my work friend at her desk. "Finally, maybe we'll get coffee that doesn't taste like sadness." Except I didn't text her. I hit reply all to the CEO's company-wide email to all 600 employees, including the CEO. And I didn't just send, "Finally, maybe we'll get coffee that doesn't taste like sadness." Oh no, that would have been manageable. What I actually sent was, "Finally, maybe we'll get coffee that doesn't taste like sadness. I've been bringing my own from home because I'm pretty sure the current machine is older than I am and possibly haunted. No idea how Dave drinks like 6 cups a day. That man's stomach lining must be made of steel, or he's just dead inside." Dave is the CFO. I realized my mistake about 5 seconds after I hit send. That's when I saw "to all employees" at the top of the email. My stomach dropped. I just sat there, frozen, watching my career flash before my eyes. Then the replies started coming in. Someone from accounting. "The coffee is pretty bad." Someone from HR. "I've also wondered about Dave's stomach." Someone from the Seattle office. "Our coffee is great. Sounds like a you problem." Then Dave himself replied, "For the record, I'm not dead inside. I just have low standards." The CEO replied, "Noted. I'll make sure the new machine meets everyone's standards." My boss called me into his office. I thought I was getting fired. Instead, he was trying not to laugh. He told me that while I should definitely be more careful with email, the CEO thought it was funny, and apparently the "dead inside" comment had become a meme in the executive Slack channel. He also said Dave wanted to talk to me. I went to Dave's office expecting a lecture. Dave is this super intimidating guy, very serious, never smiles. I apologized profusely. He just looked at me and said, "You're right, the coffee is terrible. Also, I am a little dead inside, but that's middle management for you." Then he laughed and told me not to worry about it. For the next month, people I'd never met would stop me in the hallway and say things like, "Hey, you're the coffee email person," or "Are you dead inside yet?" It became this whole thing. The company actually did get a really nice coffee machine, and when it was installed, the CEO sent another company-wide email saying, "Thanks to employee feedback, we now have coffee that hopefully doesn't taste like sadness." I've been at the company for 3 years since then, and people still bring it up. I got promoted last year, and during my promotion announcement, my boss joked that I'd gone from reply all intern to reply all manager. At this point, I've accepted that this will be on my tombstone. Here lies the person who roasted the CFO in a company-wide email. Honestly, it could have been so much worse, and the coffee really is better now. Let's move on to the next story. I'm 25, and up until 6 months ago, I lived with 2 roommates in a 3-bedroom apartment. One of them, I'll call her Jenna, seemed pretty normal when we all moved in together. She was quiet, kept to herself, paid rent on time. No red flags. The other roommate, Mike, was chill. We all got along fine, or so I thought. About 4 months into living together, I started noticing weird things. Small stuff at first. My mail would go missing occasionally. I'd get notifications that packages were delivered, but they'd never show up. I figured it was porch pirates or mail carrier mistakes. Then my credit card got declined at a restaurant, which was weird, because I'd just gotten paid and knew I had money. I checked my bank account, and there were charges I didn't recognize. A bunch of online shopping purchases, subscriptions to streaming services I didn't have, even a charge for a gym membership across town. I immediately called my bank, reported fraud, got a new card. They refunded everything. I figured someone had stolen my card number somehow, changed all my passwords, and moved on. 2 weeks later, it happened again. Different card, same thing. More unauthorized charges. I was confused because I'd been so careful. New passwords, new card. I even checked my computer for malware. Nothing. I reported it again, got another new card, and this time, I kept the physical card on me at all times. Then I got a notification from my credit monitoring app that someone had opened a new credit card in my name. I freaked out. This wasn't just fraud anymore. This was identity theft. I froze my credit, filed a police report, the whole 9 yards. The detective asked if anyone had access to my personal information, and I said no. I live alone with roommates, but I keep all my documents locked up. Except I didn't always keep them locked up. I'd gotten lazy. My file cabinet in my room had my social security card, birth certificate, old tax returns, all of it. And I didn't always lock my bedroom door when I left for work. I set up a hidden camera in my room, one of those tiny ones that looks like a phone charger. I didn't tell my roommates because I didn't want to accuse anyone without proof. 3 days later, I checked the footage, and there it was. Jenna, in my room, going through my file cabinet, taking photos of my documents with her phone. I watched the entire video. She spent maybe 20 minutes in there, photographed everything, then carefully put it all back exactly how it was. She'd done this before. I just hadn't caught it. I felt sick. This person I'd been living with, eating dinner with, watching TV with, had been stealing my identity for months. I called the police and showed them the video. They told me to secure all my documents and not confront her until they could investigate. That was the hardest part, acting normal around her while knowing what she'd done. 2 days later, the police came to the apartment with a warrant and arrested her. Turns out, Jenna wasn't even her real name. She had multiple identities, had done this to other roommates in other cities, and was wanted in 2 other states. She'd been using my information to open credit cards, take out small loans, even rent a car that she'd apparently abandoned in another state. The total damage was over $30,000. The craziest part? Mike had no idea. He was just as shocked as I was. We had to find a new roommate immediately because obviously Jenna wasn't coming back, and neither of us could afford the rent without a third person. It took me 8 months to sort everything out with the credit bureaus, banks, and collection agencies. Everything's finally cleared now, but I'm paranoid about roommates. I ran like 5 background checks on our new roommate before I agreed to let him move in. I keep all my documents in a fireproof safe with a combination lock, and my bedroom door has a deadbolt. The detective told me Jenna pled guilty and got 4 years in prison. Apparently, she'd stolen the identities of at least 7 other people. Some of them lost way more than I did. One guy lost his house because she took out a second mortgage in his name. I still have nightmares about it sometimes. The worst part wasn't even the money or the hassle of fixing everything. It was the violation of trust. She was in my home, in my space, and she systematically stole pieces of my life while pretending to be my friend. I don't think I'll ever feel totally safe with roommates again. All right, next one up. My sister and I have always had a complicated relationship. She's 3 years older than me, and growing up, she was the golden child. I was the screw-up. She got straight A's, I got C's. She went to a great college, I went to community college. She married a doctor. I'm still single. You get the picture. My parents worship her. About a year ago, my sister announced she was pregnant with her first kid. Everyone was thrilled. My parents were crying happy tears, talking about how they couldn't wait to be grandparents. My sister immediately went into full baby planning mode. Gender reveal, nursery design, baby shower, the works. The baby shower was supposed to be this huge event. My mom rented out a country club, invited like 80 people, hired a caterer. It was more like a wedding than a baby shower. I was asked to help set up and basically be free labor, which was fine, whatever. I wanted to support my sister, even though she'd barely acknowledged me for most of my life. Here's the thing, though. A few months before the baby shower, I ran into my sister's husband at a coffee shop. He was with another woman. They were holding hands, being coupley. I froze. He saw me, and his face went white. The woman excused herself, and he came over to me and begged me not to say anything. He said it was a mistake. It was over. He'd broken it off, and telling my sister would only hurt her and the baby. I didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to tell my sister immediately, but another part of me thought maybe he was right. She was pregnant, stressed, and finding out her husband was cheating might actually be dangerous for the baby. I decided to wait until after the birth to say something, but then the baby shower happened. Everything was perfect. Pink decorations everywhere, a fancy cake, games, gifts. My sister was glowing, talking about how blessed she was and how amazing her husband was. My mom gave this speech about what a perfect family they were going to be. Everyone was toasting to their future. And then my sister asked me to give a speech. I hadn't prepared anything. I'm not good at public speaking. But everyone was looking at me, waiting. So I stood up, and I don't know what came over me, but I just said it. I love my sister, and I want her to be happy, but I can't stand here and pretend everything is perfect when it's not. 2 months ago, I saw your husband with another woman. They were on a date. He begged me not to tell you, and I didn't because I thought it would protect you. But standing here, watching everyone celebrate this fake perfect life, I realized you deserve to know the truth. The room went completely silent. My sister's face went from confused to horrified to furious. In about 3 seconds, her husband tried to deny it, but I pulled out my phone and showed her the photos I'd secretly taken that day at the coffee shop. I hadn't planned to use them, but I'd kept them just in case. My sister started crying. My mom started screaming at me, calling me jealous and spiteful. My dad physically escorted me out of the country club. The baby shower was over. Everyone left. I got about 50 messages from family members calling me every name in the book. My sister blocked me on everything. A few days later, my sister's husband moved out. Turns out the affair had been going on for over a year, and the woman I saw him with was actually his coworker who he'd been planning to leave my sister for after the baby was born. My sister filed for divorce. My parents still aren't speaking to me. They blame me for ruining my sister's marriage, even though I'm not the one who cheated. Some of my extended family thinks I did the right thing. Others think I should have kept my mouth shut. My sister eventually unblocked me and sent me a message saying she was glad I told her, but she needed space. It's been 6 months. My sister had the baby, a girl. I haven't met my niece. I don't know if I ever will. I think about that day constantly, wondering if I should have handled it differently. Maybe I should have told my sister privately instead of making a scene. Maybe I should have waited until after the baby was born. Maybe I should have minded my own business. But I also think about what would have happened if I hadn't said anything. My sister would have raised her baby with a man who was planning to abandon them. She would have kept living a lie. At least now she knows the truth, even if it destroyed her picture-perfect life. I don't regret telling her. I just regret how I did it. Let's get into the next one. I live in a quiet suburban neighborhood, one of those places where everyone knows everyone and people actually wave at each other. It's nice, except for one neighbor who I'll call Karen, because that's genuinely what she acts like. Karen lives 2 houses down from me, and from the day I moved in, she's had a problem with literally everything I do. First, it was my lawn. I let my grass get a little long because I was busy with work, and she left a note on my door about how I was bringing down property values. Then it was my car, which she said was parked too close to her driveway, even though it was fully in front of my own house. Then it was my dog barking, even though I don't have a dog. I tried to be friendly. I apologized for the lawn, mowed it the next day. I moved my car even though I didn't need to. I even told her I don't have a dog. And she insisted she heard barking coming from my house. Spoiler alert, it was her own dog. The final straw happened 3 months ago. I work from home, and I like to have my office window open when the weather's nice. I take a lot of video calls for work, and sometimes I'm on camera talking to clients, or my team. Normal work stuff. One day, I was on a call with a client discussing a project. It was a pretty standard conversation, nothing loud or disruptive. My window was open because it was a beautiful spring day. About 20 minutes into the call, I heard a knock on my door. I muted myself, went to answer it, and there were 2 police officers standing there. I was confused. I asked if everything was okay, and they said they'd received a noise complaint about me, yelling and disturbing the peace. I explained that I was on a work call and definitely wasn't yelling. They asked if they could hear the call, so I brought them inside and showed them my computer screen with the client still on video. The client, bless him, was like, "Is everything okay?" And I explained that the police were there for a noise complaint. The client laughed and said we'd barely been talking above normal volume. The officers apologized, said it seemed like a misunderstanding, and left. I knew it was Karen. She was the only neighbor close enough to hear me, and she'd been looking for an excuse to cause problems. I went over to her house to talk to her about it. Big mistake. She answered the door and immediately started yelling at me about how I'm constantly disrupting the neighborhood with my loud phone calls and unprofessional behavior. I tried to explain that I work from home and take video calls, which is completely normal. She said I should close my windows or get an office outside my home because my work was disturbing her peace. I lost my temper a little. I told her that calling the cops on someone for talking at a normal volume during work hours was ridiculous, and that if she had a problem, she should have talked to me first, instead of wasting police resources. She said she didn't need to talk to me first, and that she'd call the cops again if I kept being loud. So I decided to be petty. I started taking all my calls with my window open, every single one. And I made sure to laugh a little louder, talk a little more enthusiastically. Nothing actually disruptive, just normal human conversation, but enough that she'd hear it. She called the cops 3 more times over the next 2 weeks. By the 3rd time, the police were annoyed. One of the officers told me off the record that they'd warned Karen about filing false reports, and that if she called again without a legitimate reason, she could face fines. That slowed her down. But Karen wasn't done. She started filing complaints with the Homeowners Association about everything she could think of. My trash cans were out 30 minutes too long after pickup. My mailbox was unsightly, even though it's the same mailbox that came with the house. My garden gnome was apparently violating HOA aesthetic guidelines. The HOA started sending me letters about all these alleged violations. I responded to every single one with photos, timestamps, and evidence that I wasn't violating anything. Eventually, the HOA did an inspection and found that Karen had been filing frivolous complaints. They sent her a warning letter. Things finally came to a head when Karen tried to claim that my excessive noise was affecting her property value and threatened to sue me. I consulted a lawyer who laughed and said she had no case. I sent her a cease and desist letter telling her to stop harassing me, or I'd pursue legal action for harassment. She hasn't called the cops on me since. She still glares at me when I'm outside, and she's tried to turn other neighbors against me, but most of them think she's ridiculous. One neighbor even told me Karen had done the same thing to the people who lived in my house before me, and they moved because they couldn't deal with her anymore. I'm not moving. This is my house, and I'm not letting some busybody with too much time on her hands push me out. I still take my calls with the window open out of spite. Next story coming up. My best friend, let's call her Lily, and I have known each other since high school. We're both 26 now, and I thought I knew everything about her. We talked every day, hung out constantly, told each other our deepest secrets. Or at least, I thought we did. About a year ago, Lily started talking about her new job. She said she'd gotten hired at a prestigious marketing firm in the city, big salary, great benefits, the dream job she'd always wanted. I was so happy for her. She'd been struggling to find good work after college, bouncing between retail jobs and temp positions. This seemed like her big break. She'd tell me stories about her coworkers, her projects, the clients she was working with. She'd complain about her demanding boss, but also brag about the fancy office and the free catered lunches. She even showed me photos of the building. Everything seemed legit. Then one day, I was in the city for a doctor's appointment, and I realized I was only a few blocks from Lily's office. I texted her, asking if she wanted to grab lunch. She said she was swamped with work and couldn't leave the office. I offered to bring her something, and she said no. She had a working lunch scheduled. Okay, fine. She's busy. I thought nothing of it, but I was curious. So I walked past the building she'd shown me in photos. Nice place, big glass windows, looked exactly like she described. I was about to leave when I saw someone I recognized walking out. It was Lily's coworker from the stories she told me, the guy she'd complained about who always microwaved fish in the break room. I waved at him, thinking I'd introduce myself as Lily's friend. He looked confused. I said, "Hey, you work with Lily, right?" He said he didn't know anyone named Lily. I showed him a photo of her on my phone. He said he'd never seen her before in his life. I was confused. Maybe she'd described a different coworker. I went into the building and asked the receptionist if Lily worked there, using her full name. The receptionist checked the directory and said no one by that name was employed there. I felt like I was losing my mind. I called Lily and asked her point blank if she really worked at this company. She got defensive and asked why I was questioning her. I told her I was at the building, and the receptionist said she didn't work there. There was a long silence, and then she hung up on me. She didn't answer my calls or texts for 2 days. Finally, she agreed to meet me at a coffee shop. I asked her to explain what was going on. She broke down crying and admitted she'd been lying about the job. She'd never worked there. She'd been unemployed for over a year. The photos of the office building, she'd taken them from the company's website. The stories about coworkers and projects, all made up, pieced together from TV shows and things she'd read online. Even the complaints about her boss were fictional. She'd been pretending to go to work every day, but really, she was just going to the library or coffee shops and killing time until evening. I asked her why. Why lie to me, her best friend? She said she was ashamed. Everyone we knew from high school was doing well, getting good jobs, getting married, buying houses. She felt like a failure. She thought if she lied about having a good job, people would respect her more. And once she started lying, she couldn't figure out how to stop without admitting the truth. I asked her how she was paying her bills. Turns out, She'd been living off credit cards and money from her parents, who also thought she had a job. She was drowning in debt and had been too embarrassed to ask for help. I didn't know what to say. On one hand, I felt betrayed. She'd lied to me for a year about a huge part of her life. On the other hand, I felt awful for her. She was clearly struggling and felt like she couldn't be honest about it. I told her I needed some time to process everything, and we didn't talk for a few weeks. During that time, I found out she'd been lying about other things too. The guy she'd been dating, made up. The vacation she went on, never happened. It was like I didn't actually know her at all. Eventually, she reached out and apologized. She said she was getting help, seeing a therapist, and trying to get her life together. She'd come clean to her parents and was working on finding a real job. She asked if we could still be friends. I wanted to say yes, but I didn't know if I could trust her anymore. How do you rebuild a friendship when you find out it was partially built on lies? We've been trying to repair things, but it's been hard. She's been honest with me since then, as far as I can tell, but there's always this doubt in the back of my mind. Did she really go to that job interview? Or is she making it up? Is she actually seeing a therapist? Or is that another lie? She did eventually get a real job, nothing as fancy as the fake one, but it's legitimate and she seems happier. We still talk, but not as much as we used to. I don't think our friendship will ever be the same. The trust is just gone. The weirdest part is, I would have supported her if she'd just been honest from the beginning. I wouldn't have judged her for being unemployed, but knowing she lied so easily for so long makes me wonder what else she might be lying about. I guess I'll never really know. All right, moving to the next one. I'm 22, currently in my senior year of college, and I just found out something that's made me question my entire relationship with my dad. This is going to be long, but I need to get it out. My parents divorced when I was 10. It was messy, but they eventually worked out a custody arrangement and things settled down. My dad remarried when I was 14 to a woman who had a son, my stepbrother, who's 2 years younger than me. Let's call him Josh. Growing up, my dad always told me he'd been saving for my college education since I was born. He'd put money away every month, and by the time I was ready for college, there'd be enough to cover most of my tuition and expenses. It made me feel secure, knowing I wouldn't have to worry too much about student loans. When I was applying to colleges, I got into my dream school, but it was expensive. My dad told me not to worry about the cost, that we'd figure it out with the college fund and some financial aid. I was so relieved. I started school, and everything seemed fine. My dad was paying the bills. I was focusing on my classes. Life was good. Fast forward to the beginning of my senior year, a few months ago. I was applying for a private student loan to cover some living expenses, and I needed information about my existing financial aid and payments. I asked my dad for the account information so I could include it in my loan application. He got weird about it. He kept saying he'd send it to me later, that he was busy, that he'd have to look for the paperwork. This went on for 2 weeks. Finally, I told him I needed it immediately, or I wouldn't be able to finish my loan application. He admitted there was no college fund. There hadn't been one for 2 years. I was confused. What did he mean there was no college fund? He'd been paying for college. Where was that money coming from? He said he'd been paying out of pocket and putting it on credit cards, but he couldn't keep doing it. He was drowning in debt. I asked him what happened to the college fund he'd been saving for 18 years. He got quiet, and then he told me he'd given it to Josh. Not even given, he'd used it to pay for Josh's expenses after Josh dropped out of high school and needed money for trade school and living costs. I was floored. Josh had dropped out of high school 2 years ago because he wasn't into traditional education. My dad and stepmom had supported his decision and paid for him to attend a trade program to become an electrician. Apparently, that program, plus Josh's rent and other expenses, had eaten through my entire college fund. I asked my dad why he didn't tell me. Why did he let me believe there was a college fund? Why did he let me make decisions about school based on money that didn't exist? He said he didn't want me to worry and that he thought he could make it work. He also said Josh needed the money more than I did because I had scholarships and financial aid. I was furious. I've been working part-time throughout college, taking out loans, stressing about money, all while thinking I had this safety net that turned out to not exist. Meanwhile, Josh has been living in a nice apartment, driving a new truck my dad helped him buy, and working a job he got through the trade program. I told my dad I felt betrayed, that money was supposed to be for me. He'd promised it to me my entire childhood. He got defensive and said he had to make tough choices as a parent, and that Josh needed help getting started in life. I pointed out that I also needed help, that I was literally in college trying to build a future, and he chose Josh over me. My stepmom called me selfish. She said Josh was struggling and needed support, and that I should be grateful I even got to go to college. She said some people don't have the luxury of a 4-year degree, and that I was acting entitled. I haven't spoken to my dad or stepmom in 3 months. My mom is helping me figure out my finances, and I'm working extra hours to cover my expenses for senior year. I'll graduate with way more debt than I expected, and honestly, I don't know if I'll ever forgive my dad for this. The worst part is, he doesn't even seem to understand why I'm upset. He keeps texting me saying I'm overreacting and that family helps family. But apparently, I'm not family enough to get the money that was supposed to be mine. Josh, by the way, hasn't said a word to me about any of this. I don't know if he even knows where the money came from, or if he cares. We were never close, but now I can't even look at him without feeling angry. I keep thinking about all the times my dad told me he was proud of me for going to college, for working hard, for getting scholarships. Was any of that real? Or was he just glad he wouldn't have to fully pay for my education so he could give my money to Josh? I graduate in May. My dad's been texting, asking if he and my stepmom can come to the ceremony. I don't know if I want them there. Part of me wants to tell him he's not invited, that if he cared about my education, he wouldn't have stolen my future to fund Josh's life. But another part of me knows that would just cause more drama. I haven't decided yet. All I know is that things will never be the same between us. Let's jump into the next story. I worked at a tech startup for 3 years. When I started, the company was small, maybe 20 people, and everyone genuinely cared about the work we were doing. The CEO was hands-on, the culture was collaborative, and I felt like I was part of something important. Then we got acquired by a bigger company, and everything changed. The new management came in and immediately started making changes. They fired half the staff, including people who'd been there since the beginning. They brought in their own people for leadership positions. The laid-back, creative culture we'd built was replaced with corporate bureaucracy and pointless meetings. I survived the layoffs, but my job changed completely. I went from working on interesting projects to doing menial tasks that could have been automated. My new manager, let's call him Brad, was the worst. He was one of those guys who thinks being a boss means micromanaging and taking credit for other people's work. Brad would assign me projects, I'd complete them, and then he'd present them to upper management as his own ideas. When I confronted him about it, he said that's just how the corporate world works, and I needed to be a team player. He'd also schedule meetings at ridiculous times, like 7 a.m. or 8 p.m., just to assert dominance or something. The final straw came during a project I'd been working on for months. It was a complete overhaul of our user interface, something I'd pitched, designed, and coded mostly by myself. It was good work, and I was proud of it. Brad had barely been involved, just checked in occasionally to make sure I was on track. When it was time to present the project to the executive team, Brad didn't even invite me to the meeting. He presented my work as his own, didn't mention me once, and got praised by the executives for his innovative thinking. I found out about it from a coworker who'd been in the room. I was done. I'd been casually looking for other jobs, but now I was serious about it. Within 2 weeks, I had 3 offers from companies that were willing to pay me significantly more than I was making. I accepted one and gave my 2 weeks' notice. Brad called me into his office and asked why I was leaving. I told him I'd found a better opportunity. He said he was disappointed and that he'd been planning to promote me soon. I didn't believe him for a second. He then asked if I'd be willing to train my replacement before I left. Here's where it gets good. I agreed to train my replacement, but I had a plan. See, I'd been documenting every single instance of Brad taking credit for my work. Emails, meeting notes, screenshots of conversations, everything. I'd also been keeping copies of all my projects, with timestamps showing I was the one who'd created them. On my last day, I was supposed to have an exit interview with HR. I brought all my documentation with me. I laid it out for them, showed them emails where Brad explicitly told me he'd be presenting my work as his own, showed them projects where I'd done 100% of the work, but Brad's name was on the final presentation. HR was shocked. They said they'd look into it. I told them I didn't really care what they did with the information since I was leaving anyway, but I thought they should know what kind of person Brad was. Then I went to my desk, packed up my stuff, and sent one final email to the entire company. I thanked everyone for the opportunity, said I'd learned a lot, and wished everyone well. Then I CC'd the executive team and attached one of my projects with a note that said, "For reference, here's the interface redesign that was presented last month. I'm proud of the work I did on this, and I hope the team continues to build on it." I didn't explicitly call Brad out, but anyone who'd been in that presentation would know exactly what I was implying. Then I walked out. 2 weeks later, I heard through the grapevine that Brad had been put on a performance improvement plan. Apparently, after I left, they realized he hadn't actually been doing any real work and had been coasting on other people's contributions. A month after that, he was fired. I'm at my new job now, and it's amazing. Better pay, better culture, and my manager actually respects my work. I don't regret leaving for a second, and knowing that Brad got what he deserved makes it even sweeter. All right, next one. Okay, so I know how this sounds. My girlfriend's cat ruined my life is something a crazy person would say, but I swear, this story is real, and by the end of it, you'll understand why I genuinely considered moving to a different country to escape this animal. I started dating my girlfriend, Emma, about 2 years ago. She's great, smart, funny, beautiful, perfect in every way except one, her cat. This cat, whose name is Mr. Whiskers, which sounds adorable but is actually a psychological weapon, is the worst creature I have ever encountered. When Emma first told me she had a cat, I was fine with it. I like cats. I'd grown up with cats. How bad could it be? Turns out, very bad. Mr. Whiskers is not a normal cat. He's a demon in cat form, sent to Earth specifically to torment me. The first time I met Mr. Whiskers, he seemed normal. He sniffed me, let me pet him, walked away. I thought we were cool. I was wrong. That night, I woke up to the cat sitting on my chest, staring at me. Not blinking, just staring. When I tried to move, he hissed and dug his claws into my shirt. Emma thought it was cute. I thought I was going to die. Over the next few months, Mr. Whiskers made it his mission to destroy everything I loved. My favorite jacket, shredded. My laptop charger, chewed through. The expensive headphones I saved up for. He knocked them off the table and then peed on them. Emma kept saying he was adjusting to me being around. It had been 6 months. The breaking point came when I moved in with Emma. She'd been asking me to for a while, and I figured it was the next step in our relationship. Plus, her apartment was nicer than mine, and the rent was cheaper if we split it. I should have known better. The first night in the apartment, Mr. Whiskers peed in my shoes. Not on them, in them. Like he specifically climbed into each shoe and targeted the inside. Emma said it was territorial behavior, and he'd calm down. He did not calm down. Over the next month, Mr. Whiskers did the following things. Knocked over my coffee onto my work laptop, causing $800 in damage. Scratched up every piece of furniture I owned. Knocked a full glass of red wine onto my white shirt right before a job interview. And, most egregiously, locked me out of the apartment. Yes, locked me out. I don't even know how he did it. I stepped outside to grab a package. The door closed behind me, and when I tried to get back in, the deadbolt was locked. The deadbolt that requires you to turn it from the inside. Emma wasn't home. I called a locksmith. Cost me $200. When I finally got inside, Mr. Whiskers was sitting by the door, looking smug. I told Emma we needed to talk about the cat. She got defensive and said I was being dramatic. I showed her the list I'd been keeping of everything Mr. Whiskers had destroyed or ruined. It was 2 pages long. She said I was being petty and that maybe I was the problem, not the cat. That hurt. But I loved Emma, so I tried to make it work. I bought special furniture protectors. I kept my belongings in closed containers. I even tried to bond with Mr. Whiskers by buying him fancy treats and toys. He ignored the toys and knocked the treats onto the floor, where they attracted ants. We got an ant problem. Because of the cat, things came to a head 3 months ago. I was working from home on an important video call with a client. Mr. Whiskers jumped onto my desk, walked directly in front of the camera, and knocked my coffee all over my keyboard. The coffee spilled into my lap. I yelped. Client saw the whole thing. I lost the account. I snapped. I told Emma it was me or the cat. She needed to choose. She looked me dead in the eye and said, "I've had Mr. Whiskers for 8 years. I've known you for 2. That's not even a choice." So I moved out. I'm currently living in a tiny studio apartment that costs way more than my share of rent with Emma, but at least I don't live in fear of a psychotic cat. Emma and I tried to make long distance work, but it was too weird. We broke up a month after I moved out. The worst part? I still love her, but I don't regret leaving. That cat was genuinely making my life unbearable, and she chose him over me. I've been in therapy trying to process it, and my therapist keeps saying things like, it sounds like there were deeper compatibility issues. But no. It was the cat. The cat ruined everything. I heard through mutual friends that Emma's dating someone new. I hope for his sake he's allergic to cats. Let's dive into the next one. This happened about a year ago, and I still think about it all the time. I worked for what I thought was a normal import-export company. We dealt with textiles, furniture, random goods from overseas. The pay was decent, the work was boring, but easy. And I didn't ask too many questions because, honestly, who does? I'd been there about 8 months when I started noticing weird things. Small stuff at first, like we'd get shipments that were labeled as textiles, but the weight on the manifest didn't match what you'd expect for fabric. Or we'd have clients who'd order massive quantities of stuff but never seem to actually pick it up or have it delivered. My job was basically data entry and inventory management, so I saw a lot of paperwork. I started paying more attention, and things weren't adding up. We'd have invoices for products that didn't exist in our warehouse. We'd have shipments that arrived but weren't recorded in our system. When I asked my supervisor about discrepancies, he'd brush me off and say it was just accounting errors. Then one day, I was working late, trying to finish up some reports, and I accidentally opened the wrong file on the shared drive. It was a spreadsheet, but the numbers were way higher than anything I'd seen for our normal operations. We're talking millions of dollars. I clicked around a little more and found folders full of documents with company names I didn't recognize. I should have stopped there. I should have closed the file and minded my own business. But I was curious, so I kept digging. The more I read, the more I realized this wasn't just accounting errors. This was money laundering. Or at least, that's what it looked like to me. We were processing payments for fake transactions, moving money through shell companies, all while pretending to be a legitimate import-export business. I panicked. I copied some of the files onto a USB drive, closed everything, and went home. I didn't sleep that night. I kept thinking about what I'd found and what I should do about it. Part of me wanted to ignore it. It wasn't technically my problem, and I didn't want to lose my job, or worse, get in trouble if I was wrong. But the more I thought about it, the more I knew I couldn't just pretend I hadn't seen anything. If this company was doing something illegal, I didn't want to be part of it. So I contacted a lawyer, explained the situation, and asked what I should do. The lawyer told me I should report it to the authorities, and that I might be protected as a whistleblower. I went to the police with the files I'd copied. They took my statement, looked at the documents, and told me they'd investigate. They also told me not to tell anyone at work what I'd done, and to act normal. That was the hardest part. going into work every day and pretending everything was fine, while knowing the police were investigating. About 3 weeks later, federal agents showed up at the office with a warrant. They seized computers, files, everything. The whole office was in chaos. People were getting arrested, including my supervisor and the CEO. Turns out I was right. The company was a front for a money laundering operation connected to some larger criminal organization. I was called in to give testimony, and the whole process was terrifying. I had to testify in front of a grand jury, and there were moments where I genuinely feared for my safety. The lawyer representing the company tried to paint me as a disgruntled employee making things up, but the evidence spoke for itself. The case took months to resolve. Most of the higher-ups got convicted and went to prison. The company was shut down, and obviously, I was out of a job. I got some compensation as a whistleblower, but it wasn't life-changing money. Mostly, I just felt relieved that it was over. The worst part was the paranoia. For months after everything went down, I was constantly looking over my shoulder, worried that someone connected to the operation would come after me. I moved to a different city, changed my phone number, and was super careful about my online presence. The authorities assured me I was safe, but it's hard to shake that feeling. It's been a year now, and I'm working at a completely different company in a completely different industry. I did background checks on the company before I even applied. I ask way more questions than I used to, and I'm way more careful about what files I open at work. Would I do it again? Honestly, I don't know. On one hand, I'm glad I reported it because what they were doing was wrong. On the other hand, it completely upended my life, and I'm still dealing with the anxiety from it all. I guess I did the right thing, but sometimes doing the right thing really sucks. Moving on to the next story. Planning a wedding is stressful enough without dealing with a nightmare vendor, but somehow I managed to find the worst wedding photographer in existence. This happened 2 years ago, and I'm still angry about it. When my husband and I got engaged, we started looking for a photographer pretty early because we'd heard good photographers book up fast. We found this woman, let's call her Ashley, who had a beautiful portfolio, great reviews, and reasonable prices. We met with her, loved her energy, and signed a contract. Paid a deposit. Everything seemed great. Leading up to the wedding, Ashley was professional. She responded to emails, showed up to our engagement shoot on time, delivered those photos promptly. No red flags. We felt good about our choice. The wedding day came, and Ashley was there with her assistant, taking photos all day. She seemed to be doing a great job, capturing all the important moments. At the end of the night, she told us we'd get our photos within 8 to 10 weeks, which was what the contract said. We were excited. Week 10 came and went. No photos. I emailed Ashley asking for an update. She apologized and said she'd had a family emergency and was behind on editing but would have them to us soon. Okay, I understood. Life happens. I gave her more time. Another month passed. Still nothing. I emailed again. She said her computer had crashed and she'd lost some files but was working on recovering them. That scared me, but she assured me she had backups and everything would be fine. 3 more weeks. I called her this time. She didn't answer. I left a voicemail. No response. I started to panic. I emailed her every few days asking for updates. Sometimes she'd respond with excuses. Sometimes she'd ignore me completely. Finally, 6 months after our wedding, she sent me an email saying the photos were ready. I was relieved and annoyed at the same time. But then she said there was a problem. She'd undercharged us, apparently, and before she could send the photos, we needed to pay an additional $1,500. I was furious. The contract we'd signed clearly stated the price we'd agreed on. We'd paid in full before the wedding. There was no clause about additional fees. I told her this, and she said the contract price only covered a certain number of edited photos, and she'd gone over that number, so we owed more money. I read the contract again. It didn't say anything about a photo limit. It said we'd receive all photos from the wedding day, edited and delivered digitally. I sent her a copy of the contract highlighting that section. She responded saying her lawyer had advised her that the contract was ambiguous. and she was entitled to additional payment. I told her I wasn't paying extra and that if she didn't send the photos, I'd take legal action. She said if I wanted to sue her, go ahead. But she wasn't releasing the photos without payment. She was holding my wedding photos hostage. I consulted a lawyer. The lawyer said I had a strong case, but taking her to court would cost money and time, possibly more than the $1,300 she was demanding. The lawyer suggested I try negotiating first. I offered Ashley an additional $500 as a compromise, even though I didn't think I owed her anything. She refused. She wanted the full business $1,500 or no photos. At this point, I was beyond angry. I left a detailed review on every platform I could find, explaining what she'd done. I posted in local wedding groups warning other brides about her. Her business rating tanked basically overnight. Other brides started coming forward with similar stories. Turns out, I wasn't the first person she'd done this to. She threatened to sue me for defamation. I showed my lawyer, who said truth is a defense against defamation, and I had nothing to worry about. She never actually sued. Eventually, after months of back and forth and mounting public pressure from negative reviews, Ashley agreed to release the photos without the additional payment. But here's the kicker. She sent me unedited photos, just the raw files, no color correction, no retouching, nothing. She said those were technically all the photos from the wedding day, as stated in the contract. I had to hire another photographer to edit them, which cost me $800. So in the end, I did pay extra money, just not to her. I also filed a complaint with the Better Business Bureau and reported her to local wedding vendor associations. Her business eventually shut down, probably because of all the negative reviews and complaints. We got our edited photos eventually, and they turned out fine, but the whole experience tainted the memory of our wedding. Every time I look at those photos, I think about the stress and anger of dealing with Ashley. The lesson I learned: always read contracts carefully, always check recent reviews, and maybe consider photographers who have some kind of insurance or guarantee. And if a vendor starts acting shady, don't wait around hoping it'll get better. Address it immediately and document everything. Let's get into the next story. 2 years ago, I made a video that went viral. Not the good kind of viral, where you get sponsorships and opportunities. The bad kind where you become a meme and people make fun of you for months. I'm going to tell you the whole embarrassing story. I'm really into cooking. It's a hobby I've had since college, and I'm pretty good at it. I'm not a professional chef or anything, but I can make a decent meal. A few years ago, I decided to start a cooking channel on social media. Nothing serious, just sharing recipes and techniques I liked. I had maybe 200 followers, mostly friends and family. One day, I decided to film myself making what I thought was a really impressive dish, beef Wellington. If you don't know, beef Wellington is this fancy British dish with beef, mushrooms, and pastry. It's notoriously difficult to make. Gordon Ramsay is famous for yelling at people who mess it up on his shows. I'd made beef Wellington before, and it had turned out okay, so I figured I'd film the process and post it. I set up my phone, started recording, and began cooking. Everything was going fine until I got to the part where you're supposed to wrap the beef in puff pastry. For some reason, I was nervous because I was on camera, and I completely messed up the wrapping. The pastry tore, the filling started leaking out. It was a disaster. Instead of stopping and starting over, I tried to fix it on camera. I kept saying things like, "This is fine," and "It'll taste good even if it doesn't look perfect," while the whole thing fell apart in my hands. The final product looked like something a toddler made. It was lumpy, uneven, with pastry barely holding together. But I'd spent 2 hours making it, so I posted the video anyway with a caption like, "First attempt at beef Wellington, not perfect, but still delicious." I woke up the next morning to my phone exploding with notifications. The video had somehow gotten picked up by a food meme account and had been reposted everywhere. People were roasting me in the comments. Gordon Ramsay just felt a disturbance in the force. "This is a crime against British cuisine. I'm calling the police." At first I thought it was funny. I laughed at some of the comments, but then it kept spreading. My video was on TikTok, Twitter, Instagram, Reddit. People were making reaction videos. Someone auto-tuned my voice saying "this is fine" into a song. I became known as Beef Wellington Girl, and not in a good way. The worst part was, people found my other social media accounts. My personal Instagram got flooded with comments about the Beef Wellington. People were DMing me, telling me I should never cook again. Someone made a fake account pretending to be me, and posted even more ridiculous cooking videos. My face was in memes, on YouTube compilations, everywhere. I tried to ignore it, but it was hard when people I knew in real life started recognizing me from the video. I'd be at the grocery store, and someone would be like, "Hey, aren't you the Beef Wellington girl?" My coworkers found the video. My boss found the video. It was mortifying. I made the mistake of trying to respond to some of the hate, which only made it worse. I posted a follow-up video where I actually made a good Beef Wellington, trying to prove I could cook. People said I'd faked it or had someone else make it. I couldn't win. For about 6 months, anytime I posted anything on social media, the comments would be about the Beef Wellington. I eventually just stopped posting altogether, deleted my cooking account, made my personal accounts private, and tried to wait for it to blow over. It did eventually die down, but even now, 2 years later, I occasionally get a random DM or comment from someone who remembers the video. It pops up in best cooking fail compilations every few months. I'll never escape it. The experience completely killed my desire to create any kind of online content. I still cook, but only for myself and close friends. I don't film it, I don't post about it, I don't even talk about it much because I'm paranoid someone will bring up the video. The ironic thing is, the Beef Wellington I made in that video actually tasted pretty good. The presentation was terrible, but the flavor was fine. But nobody cares about that when you're a meme. They just want to laugh at you. Would I do it differently if I could go back? Absolutely. I would have just not posted the video, or at least edited out the part where everything went wrong. But I guess that's the internet for you. One bad moment caught on camera, and suddenly you're immortalized as a cautionary tale. At least I can laugh about it now. Sort of. I still cringe when I think about it too much. Alright, next story up. Renting can be a nightmare, and I learned that the hard way with the worst landlord I've ever had. This happened about a year ago when I was moving out of an apartment I'd lived in for 2 years. The apartment itself was fine. Small, kind of old, but decent for the price. The landlord, who I'll call Rick, was sketchy from the start. He always wanted rent in cash, which should have been a red flag. He rarely fixed things when they broke. The heat didn't work properly all winter, and he kept saying he'd send someone to look at it, but never did. Despite all that, I paid my rent on time every month, didn't cause any problems, and took care of the place. When it was time to move out, I cleaned everything thoroughly. I wanted to make sure I got my security deposit back, which was around $200. I did a walkthrough with Rick before I left. He looked around, didn't say much, told me everything looked fine. I asked about the security deposit, and he said he'd mail me a check within 30 days, which was what the lease required. Great. I thought, easy. 30 days passed, no check. I called Rick. He didn't answer. I texted him. No response. I emailed him. Nothing. Another week went by, and finally he responded saying he'd forgotten and would send it soon. 2 more weeks, still no check. I called again, and this time he answered. He told me he wasn't going to return my security deposit because there was damage to the apartment that needed to be repaired. I asked what damage. He said the walls needed to be repainted, the carpets needed to be cleaned, and there was a broken cabinet in the kitchen. I knew this was BS. The walls had normal wear and tear, nothing excessive. The carpets were professionally cleaned before I left, and I had the receipt to prove it, and there was no broken cabinet. I told Rick all of this, and he said if I wanted my deposit back, I'd have to take him to court. So I did. I filed a claim in small claims court. In my state, if a landlord wrongfully withholds a security deposit, they can be ordered to pay double the amount plus court costs. I documented everything. Photos of the apartment from move-in and move-out, copies of my lease, receipts for the carpet cleaning, records of all my communications with Rick. The court date came, and Rick showed up with basically no evidence. He had some vague photos of the apartment that didn't prove anything, and a handwritten list of damages with inflated costs. The judge wasn't buying it. I presented my evidence, showed that the apartment was in good condition when I left, and pointed out that Rick had violated state law by not returning my deposit or providing an itemized list of deductions within the required time frame. The judge ruled in my favor and ordered Rick to pay me double my security deposit plus court costs. Total, $20,600. Rick was furious. He tried to argue with the judge, saying it was unfair, but the judge shut him down. After the hearing, Rick told me I'd ruined his business and that he'd make sure I never rented in this city again. I told him good luck with that and walked away. But I wasn't done. While preparing for court, I'd done some research on Rick and discovered he'd been pulling the same scam on multiple tenants. He had dozens of complaints filed against him with the city's rental authority. So I filed a formal complaint, including all my documentation and the court judgment. The city launched an investigation into Rick's properties. Turns out, he was violating all sorts of housing codes and had been illegally withholding security deposits from multiple tenants for years. He ended up getting fined, and several of his rental licenses were revoked. He had to sell off some of his properties to cover the fines and back payments to former tenants. I got my money. Rick's business took a hit, and hopefully future tenants won't have to deal with his scams. The whole process took about 4 months from start to finish, but it was worth it. The lesson I learned: always document everything when you're renting. Take photos, save receipts, keep copies of all communications, and if a landlord tries to screw you over, don't be afraid to take them to court. Small claims court is designed for exactly these situations, and the filing fee is usually pretty low. I also learned to research landlords before signing a lease. A quick Google search or check with the city can tell you if they have a history of complaints. I wish I'd done that before renting from Rick, but at least I know better now. Let's jump into the next one. Family holidays can be stressful, and last year's Thanksgiving proved that in the most dramatic way possible. This story involves a lie that had been going on for over a decade, and I'm the one who finally exposed it. My family takes Thanksgiving very seriously. We're talking 30-plus people, multiple tables, enough food to feed a small army. My Aunt Carol has been in charge of cooking the turkey for as long as I can remember, and every year, people rave about it. Best turkey I've ever had. Carol, you've outdone yourself again. It's become this whole thing where Carol's turkey is legendary in our family. Here's the secret. Carol doesn't actually cook the turkey. She buys it pre-cooked from a fancy grocery store, brings it home, heats it up, and presents it as her own. I found this out completely by accident 3 years ago when I was at that grocery store and saw her loading a prepared turkey into her car the day before Thanksgiving. At the time, I thought it was funny, but harmless. Who cares if she buys the turkey instead of making it? It still tastes good, and everyone's happy. I didn't say anything, but over the years, Carol's ego about the turkey got more and more inflated. She started giving people cooking tips about how to make the perfect turkey. She wrote down a fake recipe and gave it to family members who asked. She even entered a local cooking contest, claiming the turkey was her original recipe. She didn't win, but still. Last Thanksgiving, things came to a head. My cousin Sarah, who'd been trying for years to recreate Carol's turkey using the fake recipe, brought her attempt to Thanksgiving dinner. It was dry and kind of bland, nothing like Carol's turkey. Carol made a big show of tasting it and giving Sarah constructive criticism about where she went wrong. Sarah was almost in tears. She'd spent hours working on this turkey, trying to make it as good as Carol's, and Carol was publicly critiquing it. I felt bad for Sarah, and I was annoyed with Carol for being so smug about something she didn't even make. So I said it, right there at the dinner table, in front of everyone. Carol doesn't actually make the turkey. She buys it from Whole Foods. The table went silent. Carol's face turned red. She denied it, said I was lying, said I was just trying to cause drama. but I pulled out my phone and showed everyone a photo I'd taken 3 years ago of Carol loading the prepared turkey into her car. I'd kept it as a joke, never thinking I'd actually use it. The room erupted. People were shocked, angry, confused. Sarah started laughing, then crying, then laughing again. Carol tried to defend herself, saying she'd only done it a few times when she was too busy to cook, but everyone knew that was a lie. My mom was furious with me for ruining Thanksgiving. My dad was trying not to laugh. My uncle was demanding to know if anything else Carol had claimed to make was store-bought. Carol ended up leaving early with her family. She sent a long text to the family group chat later that night, saying I'd humiliated her and that she wouldn't be attending family events anymore if I was there. Some family members sided with her, saying I should have kept my mouth shut. Others thought it was hilarious and said Carol had it coming. The family's still divided. Carol did come to Christmas, but she and I didn't speak. She didn't bring any food. This year's Thanksgiving is coming up, and there's been talk about who's going to make the turkey. Carol volunteered, but several people said they didn't trust her. It's become this whole thing. My mom keeps telling me I should apologize, but I don't think I did anything wrong. Carol lied for years, took credit for something she didn't do, and made Sarah feel terrible about her cooking. If anything, Carol should apologize to Sarah. Would I do it again? Probably not at the dinner table in front of everyone. I could have pulled Carol aside and told her to come clean herself. But in the moment, seeing Sarah's face and hearing Carol's smug criticism, I just snapped. The turkey was still good though, even if it was store-bought. Moving on to the next story. Working in an office means dealing with all kinds of personalities, but my former coworker Jessica was something special. This happened about 8 months ago, and it completely changed how I view workplace drama. Jessica and I worked on the same team at a marketing agency. We weren't friends, but we were friendly enough. She seemed nice, always cheerful, one of those people who brings cookies to share. But about 6 months into working together, I started noticing a pattern. Jessica would call in sick at least once a week, sometimes twice, always on Mondays or Fridays, always last minute, and always with some vague illness. Feeling under the weather, bad migraine, stomach bug. Our manager, who was way too nice, would just tell her to feel better and not ask questions. The problem was, Jessica's absences meant the rest of us had to pick up her slack. We were a small team, 5 people total, and when one person was constantly out, it affected everyone. I'd have to cover her meetings, finish her projects, deal with her clients. It was exhausting. After about 3 months of this, I started paying attention to Jessica's social media. I know that sounds creepy, but hear me out. On multiple occasions when she'd called in sick, she'd post photos from brunch, or shopping, or at the beach, just out living her life while supposedly too ill to work. One Friday, Jessica called in sick again. Terrible flu, she texted our group chat. Can barely get out of bed. 2 hours later, she posted an Instagram story from a spa, full face of makeup, glass of champagne, caption, "Much needed self-care day." I screenshot it. I didn't know what I was going to do with it yet, but I kept it. This happened 2 more times over the next month. She'd call in sick, then post about her day off like it was a vacation. The final straw came when we had a huge project deadline. We'd been working on this campaign for a client for 2 months, and the presentation was scheduled for a Monday morning. Jessica was supposed to handle the social media portion. The Friday before, we all stayed late to finalize everything. Jessica left at 5 p.m. saying she'd finish her part over the weekend. Monday morning, the presentation was at 9 a.m. Jessica texted at 7:30 saying she had food poisoning and couldn't make it. We were screwed. Her portion wasn't done, and we had no time to redo it. The presentation was a disaster. We lost the client. Our manager was furious, but at the team, not at Jessica. He said we should have had better backup plans and shouldn't rely on one person for critical components. Meanwhile, Jessica was posting Instagram stories from a concert she'd apparently bought tickets 2 weeks ago. I'd had enough. I compiled all the screenshots I'd taken over the past few months, showing Jessica posting from various fun activities on days she'd called in sick. I also pulled up her calendar and cross-referenced it with her sick days. The pattern was clear. She only called in sick on days that would give her a long weekend, or when she had concert tickets or other plans. I scheduled a meeting with HR and showed them everything. I explained that Jessica's absences were affecting the team's performance, and that I had evidence she was lying about being sick. HR took it seriously. They launched an investigation. Turns out, I wasn't the only person who'd noticed. Other team members had similar stories and screenshots. HR pulled Jessica's attendance records and saw she'd called in sick 42 times. In 8 months. That's insane. The average employee calls in sick maybe 4 or 5 times a year. HR confronted Jessica with the evidence. At first, she tried to claim that she was allowed to have fun on her sick days, that just because she was at a spa didn't mean she wasn't sick earlier. But when they showed her the timestamps and the fact that she'd been posting in real time during work hours, she couldn't explain it away. She got fired, not just for the fake sick days, but for time theft and violation of company policy. She apparently tried to threaten legal action, but the company had clear documentation of her lying. After Jessica was gone, the team dynamic completely changed. We weren't constantly stressed about covering for someone. Projects got done on time. Morale improved. Our manager even apologized to us for not taking the issue seriously sooner. But here's the thing. Some people think I'm a snitch. Jessica's friends at the company, the ones who apparently knew what she was doing and didn't care, think I got her fired for no reason. One of them told me I should have minded my own business. Another said everyone lies about sick days and I was just jealous. I don't feel bad about it. Jessica was taking advantage of the system and making everyone else's job harder. She was getting paid for days she didn't work, lying to our manager, and jeopardizing projects. If that makes me a snitch, fine. At least I'm not a liar. The company did update their sick day policy after this. Now you need a doctor's note if you're out more than 3 days in a month. Some people are annoyed about it, but honestly, if one person hadn't abused the system so badly, it wouldn't have been necessary. I'm still at the company, Jessica is not, and I sleep fine at night knowing I did the right thing. All right, let's dive into this next one. Friend group dynamics are complicated, and finding out you're on the outside of something is one of the worst feelings. This happened to me about a year ago, and it completely changed my perspective on the people I thought were my closest friends. I had a group of 6 friends that I'd known since college. We did everything together: weekly dinners, group vacations, constant group chat conversations. I genuinely thought these were my people, the friends I'd have for life. Turns out, I was wrong. It started when I noticed little inconsistencies. Someone would reference a conversation I didn't remember having. They'd make inside jokes I didn't understand. Plans would get made that I wasn't part of the initial discussion about. At first, I thought I was being paranoid or just forgetting things. Then one night, we were all hanging out at someone's apartment. My phone died, so I asked to borrow my friend Emma's phone to look something up. She handed it to me, and I opened her messages. Right there at the top was a group chat with everyone from our friend group except me. The chat name was Real Friends. My stomach dropped. I clicked on it before I could stop myself. The conversation was about me. They were talking about how I was too much sometimes, how I always made everything about me, how they were tired of dealing with my drama. There were messages going back months. I felt like I was going to throw up. I handed Emma her phone back without saying anything and made an excuse to leave early. I went home and cried for hours. These were my best friends, the people I'd trusted with everything, and they'd been talking behind my back for months. The next day, I confronted them. I sent a message to the main group chat asking about the secret chat. At first, no one responded. Then Emma called me. She tried to downplay it, saying it was just a chat for planning surprise things for me, like birthday parties. I asked her why it was called Real Friends, and why they were talking about me being too much. She didn't have an answer. Eventually, the truth came out. They'd created the chat because they felt like they couldn't be honest with me in the main group. They said I was sensitive and would get upset if they said anything critical. They claimed the chat wasn't meant to be mean, just a place to vent. I asked for examples of me being too sensitive or dramatic. They brought up times when I'd been going through genuinely hard things, like when my mom was sick, or when I lost my job, and I'd leaned on them for support. Apparently that was too much. I realized these people weren't really my friends. Real friends don't create secret chats to complain about you. Real friends talk to you directly if there's an issue. I told them I was done with the group and removed myself from all the group chats. They tried to apologize after a few days, said they'd overreacted, that they valued our friendship, that they wanted to work things out. But I couldn't trust them anymore. How could I, knowing they'd spent months talking about me behind my back? It's been a year, and I've moved on. I have new friends now, people who actually communicate like adults. Sometimes I see the old group's posts on social media, still hanging out together, still doing the same things we used to do. It stings a little, but mostly I'm just glad I found out who they really were. The weirdest part is running into them occasionally. We live in the same city, so it happens. We do the awkward small talk thing, pretend everything's fine, then go our separate ways. One of them, my friend Sarah, reached out a few months ago asking if we could talk. She apologized for her part in everything and said she missed our friendship. We've been slowly rebuilding trust, but it's different now. I don't think it'll ever be the same. The experience taught me a lot about recognizing red flags in friendships. If people can't be honest with you, they're not really your friends. If they create secret channels to talk about you instead of talking to you, they don't respect you. And if they think you're too much for having normal human emotions and struggles, they're not the right people for you. I'm happier now without them, even though it took a while to get here. And I'm way more careful about who I let into my inner circle. Let's move to the next story. Gym memberships are notoriously hard to cancel, but I had no idea how difficult it could be until I tried to cancel mine last year. This is the story of how I fought a gym's predatory practices and actually won. I joined a gym about 2 years ago. It was one of those budget gyms, $20 a month, no frills. The sign-up process was easy. They barely asked any questions, just swiped my card and gave me a key card. I didn't read the contract closely, which was my first mistake. I used the gym regularly for about a year. Then I moved to a different part of the city. The gym didn't have a location near my new place, so I decided to cancel. I went to the gym and asked the front desk how to cancel. They told me I had to submit a written request either in person or by certified mail. Fine, weird, but okay. I filled out a cancellation form right there at the desk and handed it to them. They said it would be processed within 30 days. A month later, I got charged again. I called the gym, and they said they never received my cancellation form. I told them I'd submitted it in person. They said they had no record of it, and I'd need to submit another one. Frustrated, I sent a cancellation request by certified mail, like they'd suggested. I got the tracking confirmation that it was delivered. The next month, I got charged again. I called, and they said the cancellation department hadn't processed it yet, and it could take 60 to 90 days. 90 days? For a cancellation? I asked to speak to a manager. The manager told me that according to my contract, I'd signed up for a 24-month commitment, and canceling early would incur a $200 cancellation fee. I'd been a member for 15 months at this point. I asked to see the contract. They emailed me a copy, and buried in the fine print was a clause about the 24-month commitment. I'd been so focused on the low monthly price that I'd completely missed it. The contract also said that even with the cancellation fee, I'd have to give 30 days notice, meaning I'd be charged for at least one more month. I was furious, but I figured I'd just pay the fee and be done with it. I went to the gym, paid the $200 cancellation fee, and confirmed my membership would end in 30 days. They gave me a receipt, and I thought that was the end of it. Nope. 2 months later, I got charged again. I called, and they said the cancellation hadn't gone through because I'd forgotten to return my key card. I'd never been told I needed to return the key card. I drove to the gym, returned the key card, and demanded they stop charging me. They charged me again the next month. At this point, I'd been trying to cancel for 6 months and had been charged hundreds of dollars for a membership I wasn't using. I was done playing nice. I filed a dispute with my credit card company, providing all the documentation, the cancellation forms, the certified mail receipts, the receipt for the cancellation fee, everything. The credit card company sided with me and reversed all the charges after the initial cancellation request, totaling about $400. The gym called me, furious, saying I owed them money and they'd send me to collections if I didn't pay. I told them to go ahead and try. I documented everything and would be happy to explain to a judge how they'd repeatedly ignored my cancellation requests. But I didn't stop there. I filed complaints with the Better Business Bureau, the State Attorney General's Consumer Protection Division, and every review site I could find. I wrote detailed reviews explaining exactly what had happened and warning others to read the contract carefully. Turns out, I wasn't alone. Dozens of other people had similar stories about this gym chain. The Attorney General's office was actually already investigating them for fraudulent business practices. My complaint was added to the pile. A few months later, the gym chain was hit with a class action lawsuit. They'd been systematically making it impossible for people to cancel, ignoring cancellation requests, and charging people indefinitely. The lawsuit resulted in a settlement where affected members got refunds and the gym had to change their cancellation policies. I got a check for $650 as part of the settlement, which covered all my disputed charges, plus some extra. The gym also sent me a formal apology letter, which felt hollow, but whatever. The whole experience taught me to always read contracts carefully, document everything, and don't be afraid to fight back when a company is clearly scamming you. Companies count on people giving up or not knowing their rights. If you push back with evidence and persistence, they'll usually back down. I joined a new gym after all this, and the first thing I did was read the entire contract. I also checked online reviews to make sure they didn't have a history of cancellation issues. So far, so good. Next one coming up. Property disputes with neighbors are never fun, but this one escalated to a level I never could have imagined. It started 3 years ago with a tree and ended with lawyers, insurance companies, and a relationship that will never be repaired. When I bought my house, one of the things I loved about it was the big backyard. Perfect for barbecues, gardening, and just relaxing outside. My neighbor's property had a huge oak tree right on the property line. It was beautiful, probably 50 or 60 years old, massive branches stretching over both our yards. About a year after I moved in, I noticed the tree was dropping a lot of dead branches. Not small twigs, big branches that could do serious damage. I mentioned it to my neighbor, let's call him Tom, suggesting maybe he should have a tree service look at it. Tom said the tree was fine and had been there for decades. He didn't want to spend money on tree maintenance. I let it go, figuring if Tom wasn't worried about his own tree, maybe I was overreacting. 6 months later, we had a bad storm. I woke up the next morning to find that a huge branch from Tom's tree had fallen on my roof. It had smashed through the shingles and damaged the structure underneath. There was also damage to my gutters and my fence. I immediately called Tom and showed him the damage. He admitted the branch was from his tree, but said it was an act of God, and therefore not his responsibility. I explained that wasn't how it worked, that since the tree was on his property and he'd been warned about the dead branches, he was liable. He disagreed and suggested I file a claim with my homeowner's insurance. I did file a claim, and my insurance covered most of the repairs, minus my $2,500 deductible. But my insurance company then went after Tom's insurance to recover the costs, which is standard practice. Tom's insurance refused to pay, claiming the tree had been healthy and the storm was an unforeseeable event. My insurance adjuster came out and looked at the tree. He took photos of all the other dead branches still hanging there and got a report from an arborist stating that the tree was diseased and should have been maintained or removed years ago. Armed with this evidence, my insurance company sued Tom's insurance. While this was happening, I got another estimate from a tree service to remove the dangerous branches that were still hanging over my property. The estimate was $3,000. I asked Tom if he'd be willing to split the cost, since the branches posed a danger to both our properties. He refused, saying if I wanted the branches gone, I could pay for it myself. Here's where it gets complicated. Legally, I wasn't allowed to cut branches on his side of the property line without his permission, even if they were hanging over my yard. But I also couldn't leave them there knowing they could fall and cause more damage. I consulted a lawyer who advised me to send Tom a formal letter requesting he remove the hazardous branches, and if he refused, I could proceed with removal and sue him for the cost. I sent the letter by certified mail. Tom ignored it. After 30 days, I had the tree service come out and remove all the dangerous branches, both on my side and his side of the property line. The total cost was $3,200. I then sued Tom in small claims court for the full amount. In court, I presented all my evidence, the photos of the damaged roof, the arborist report, the letter I'd sent Tom, everything. Tom showed up with no evidence and tried to argue that I'd had no right to touch his tree. The judge sided with me, ruling that since Tom had been notified of the danger and refused to act, I was within my rights to remove the hazard, and he owed me the full $3,200 plus court costs. Tom was livid. He refused to pay, so I had to go through the process of getting a wage garnishment. It took months, but I eventually got my money. You'd think that would be the end of it, but no. The insurance lawsuit dragged on for over a year. Eventually, Tom's insurance settled and paid my insurance company for the roof damage. But because the whole thing went on so long and involved lawyers, my insurance premiums went up. Not by a huge amount, but enough to be annoying. Tom and I haven't spoken since the court case. He glares at me when he sees me outside. He's told other neighbors that I'm a lawsuit-happy jerk who attacked his property. I've heard through the grapevine that he's planning to cut down the entire tree out of spite, which honestly, I wish he'd just done in the first place. The whole situation could have been avoided if Tom had just taken care of his tree when I first mentioned the dead branches. Instead, it cost him thousands of dollars, damaged our relationship beyond repair, and created years of stress for both of us. The lesson I learned is to document everything when it comes to property issues. Take photos, send certified letters, get expert opinions in writing, and if a neighbor is being unreasonable, don't hesitate to involve lawyers or insurance companies. Some people will only respond when there are legal consequences. I also learned that property line disputes bring out the worst in people. Tom and I could have been friendly neighbors, but instead, we're enemies over a tree. It's sad, but it is what it is. All right, let's get into this one. Finding out someone you love has been cheating on you is devastating, but finding out through their fitness app? That's a new level of ridiculous. This happened to me about 8 months ago, and I'm still processing it. I'd been dating my boyfriend, let's call him Mark, for 2 years. We lived together, talked about getting engaged, the whole deal. I thought everything was great, sure. We had our issues like any couple, but nothing that seemed serious. Or so I thought. Mark was really into fitness. He went to the gym every day, tracked his runs, counted his macros, the works. He used one of those fitness apps that connects to your smartwatch and tracks your location when you exercise. Ididoina used the same app, and we were connected as friends so we could see each other's workouts and cheer each other on. One night, I was scrolling through the app just out of boredom, looking at Mark's workout history. He'd logged a run that evening, 5 miles through a park across town. That was weird because he usually ran in our neighborhood or on the treadmill at our gym. I didn't think much of it at first, but then I noticed he'd been running in that same area a few times a week for the past month. I clicked on one of the routes to see the map. The run started and ended at the same location, an apartment complex I didn't recognize. Curious, I checked a few more of his recent runs. They all started and ended at the same apartment complex. Maybe he just found a new running route he liked, but why wouldn't he mention it? And why run across town when we lived in a perfectly good area for running? Something felt off. The next time Mark said he was going for a run, I checked the app in real time. Sure enough, he drove across town to that apartment complex, and his run started from there. While he was gone, I did something I'm not proud of. I went through his phone. I found messages with a woman named Ashley. They'd been seeing each other for 6 months. She lived in that apartment complex. Mark had been telling me he was going to the gym or for runs, and instead, he was spending time with her. The messages were explicit. They were definitely sleeping together. There were also messages where they talked about how guilty he felt, but how he couldn't resist her. I was shaking. I screenshot everything and sent the screenshots to my own phone. Then I put his phone back exactly where I found it and waited for him to come home. When Mark got back from his run, all sweaty and gross, I asked him how his run was. He said it was great, talked about how he'd pushed himself to run faster. I asked where he'd run. He said around the neighborhood. I called him a liar and showed him the app with his running route clearly starting at Ashley's apartment. His face went white. He tried to deny it at first, saying he'd just stopped by a friend's place, but I showed him the screenshots of the messages. He broke down, admitted everything, begged me to forgive him. He said it had been a mistake, that he loved me, that he'd end things with Ashley. I told him to get out. He tried to argue, saying it was his apartment too and I couldn't just kick him out. I told him I didn't care, that he could sleep on the couch or leave, but either way, we were done. He left and stayed at his parents' house. The next few weeks were a nightmare. We had to sort out the apartment, who was taking what, all the logistics of ending a 2-year relationship. Mark kept trying to get me to talk to him, to work things out, but I was done. He'd lied to me for 6 months, looked me in the eye every day, and lied. The worst part was how stupid I felt. I should have noticed something was off. He'd been spending so much time at the gym, or running, that in retrospect it was obvious. But I trusted him completely, and he'd taken advantage of that. I also felt like an idiot for finding out through a fitness app. Like, of all the ways to catch someone cheating, that has to be one of the dumbest. Mark hadn't even thought to turn off the location tracking. Part of me wonders if he wanted to get caught. I heard through mutual friends that Mark and Ashley dated for a few months after we broke up. Then she dumped him. Apparently, she felt guilty about being the other woman and couldn't get past it. I feel bad for Mark if he hadn't brought it all on himself. It's been 8 months, and I'm doing a lot better. I'm dating someone new, and he doesn't even use fitness apps, which is honestly a relief. I learned a lot from the experience, mainly about trusting my instincts. If something feels off, it probably is. And I definitely learned to check fitness app locations if you're dating someone who's really into working out. You never know what you might find. Let's move on to the next story. Workplace harassment is a serious issue, and reporting it should be straightforward. But my experience reporting a coworker last year showed me how complicated and messy it can actually get. I worked at a mid-sized company in the finance department. My coworker, let's call him Dan, had been there for about 5 years when I started. He was one of those guys who thought he was charming, but was actually just creepy. He'd make comments about women's appearances, stand too close, touch people's shoulders or backs when talking to them. Classic boundary issues. At first, his behavior toward me was just annoying. He'd comment on my outfits, ask personal questions about my dating life, find excuses to come talk to me even when we didn't work on the same projects. I tried to be polite but firm, giving short answers and redirecting conversations to work topics. But it escalated. He started sending me messages after work hours. Nothing explicitly inappropriate, but definitely too friendly for a coworker. Thinking about you. You looked really good today. Wish we got to spend more time together. I didn't respond to these messages, hoping he'd take the hint. Then one day, he cornered me in the break room. No one else was around, and he told me he had feelings for me and wanted to take me on a date. I told him I wasn't interested and that I wanted to keep our relationship professional. He said he understood, but over the next few weeks, he kept trying. More messages, more comments, more finding excuses to be near me. I started documenting everything, screenshots of messages, dates and times of inappropriate comments, witnesses when possible. After about 2 months of this, I reported him to HR. I showed them all my documentation and explained that despite telling him repeatedly that I wasn't interested and wanted him to stop, he continued. HR took my complaint seriously, or so they said. They interviewed Dan, interviewed a few other people in the office, and came back to me saying they'd issued him a warning and mandatory harassment training. They assured me the behavior would stop. It did stop, but not in the way I'd hoped. Dan completely avoided me, wouldn't speak to me in meetings, wouldn't respond to my work emails, acted like I didn't exist. That alone I could have dealt with. But then other things started happening. My workload suddenly increased. Projects I'd been on got reassigned to other people, and I got stuck with the boring, tedious work nobody wanted. My manager, who had always been supportive, became distant and critical. I was left out of important meetings. When I asked about it, I was told it was just how things worked out. I realized pretty quickly that Dan had spun his own narrative to other people in the office. I later found out he'd told people I'd come on to him, and when he rejected me, I filed a false harassment claim out of spite. Some people believed him, including apparently my manager. I tried to fight it. I went back to HR and explained what was happening, that I was being retaliated against for filing a complaint. HR said they'd look into it, but nothing changed. My performance reviews, which had always been excellent, suddenly became mediocre. I was told I needed to improve my teamwork skills and be more collaborative. The work environment became toxic. People whispered when I walked by. I was excluded from team lunches and happy hours. One coworker told me off the record that people thought I was a troublemaker and to watch out because the company would find a way to get rid of me. I started looking for a new job immediately. It took about 4 months, but I found something better. When I gave my notice, my manager didn't even seem surprised. I didn't do an exit interview because what was the point? The company had made it clear they cared more about protecting Dan and avoiding liability than addressing the actual problem. About a month after I left, I heard through a former colleague that another woman had filed a harassment complaint against Dan. Then another. Apparently, I hadn't been the first or the only one, and now that multiple people were coming forward, the company couldn't ignore it anymore. Dan was eventually fired. Part of me felt vindicated, but mostly I just felt angry. If the company had taken my complaint seriously and actually done something instead of protecting Dan, those other women might not have had to go through what they went through, and I might still be working there in a job I actually liked. The experience taught me that reporting harassment is the right thing to do, but it doesn't always work out the way it should. Companies often care more about protecting themselves from lawsuits than protecting their employees, and sometimes standing up for yourself can cost you your job, your reputation, or both. Would I report harassment again? Honestly, I don't know. I'd like to think I would, but knowing how badly it went last time, I definitely think twice, and that's a really depressing thing to have to say. All right, let's dive into the next one. Birthdays aren't supposed to be a big deal once you're an adult, but it still hurts when the people closest to you completely forget. This happened on my 30th birthday, which made it even worse. I'm not someone who expects grand celebrations or parties. I don't need gifts or fancy dinners, but I do appreciate when the people I love acknowledge my birthday, even if it's just a text message. It's basic human decency. Leading up to my 30th birthday, I'd been going through a rough time. I'd just gotten out of a long-term relationship. I was stressed about work, and I was generally feeling pretty down. I mentioned to my family multiple times that I was dreading turning 30, that I didn't feel like I'd accomplished what I wanted to by this age. They all said supportive things like 30 is just a number, and we'll do something special. My birthday was on a Wednesday. I woke up that morning and checked my phone. No messages from my parents, my 2 siblings, or any of my extended family. I figured they were just waiting until later in the day. I went to work. A few of my coworkers remembered and wished me happy birthday, which was nice, but still nothing from my family. By lunchtime, I was confused. By evening, I was hurt. By bedtime, I was angry. Not a single person in my family had reached out. Not a text, not a call, Not even a Facebook post. They'd all completely forgotten. Meanwhile, I could see on social media that they'd all been active that day, posting about random things, just living their lives while my birthday didn't even register. I made a decision. I wasn't going to say anything. I was going to wait and see how long it took them to realize they'd forgotten. Part of me was curious. Part of me wanted them to feel guilty. And part of me was just too hurt to reach out. Days went by. My mom called me that Friday to chat about something completely unrelated. She didn't mention my birthday. My brother texted me about a sports game. No birthday mention. My sister sent me a funny meme. Nothing about my birthday. A week passed. Then 2 weeks. I couldn't believe it. How do you forget your child's 30th birthday? How do you forget your sibling's birthday? We're not estranged. We talk regularly. It's not like I'm some distant relative they barely know. Finally, 3 weeks after my birthday, my mom called me and mid-conversation, she said, "Oh, I need to put your birthday on my calendar for next year so I don't forget." And then there was this long pause. I could hear her brain working. "Wait, when is your birthday?" I told her. There was silence. Then, "Oh my God, that was 3 weeks ago. I'm so sorry, I completely forgot." She started crying on the phone, apologizing profusely. I told her it was fine, even though it wasn't. Within an hour, I got calls and texts from my entire family, everyone apologizing, everyone feeling terrible. My dad sent me $500 with a note saying he was the worst father in the world. My sister sent flowers to my apartment. My brother offered to fly out and take me to dinner. They all wanted to make it up to me, to do something special, to prove they cared. But here's the thing. I didn't want their guilt gifts or their belated celebrations. What I wanted was for them to have remembered in the first place. All the apologies and flowers in the world couldn't change the fact that they'd all forgotten the most important birthday of my life. I accepted their apologies because what else was I going to do? But things have been weird since then. Every time we talk, there's this underlying tension. They're overly attentive now, checking in on me constantly, asking how I'm doing. It feels performative, like they're trying to prove they care because they feel guilty. My mom has apologized probably 20 times since then. She keeps bringing it up, saying she doesn't know how it happened, that she feels like a terrible mother. I've told her to let it go, but she can't. The guilt is eating her alive. Part of me regrets not saying something sooner. If I'd reached out after a day or two and said, "Hey, you forgot my birthday," maybe it wouldn't have become this big thing. But another part of me thinks they needed to feel this guilt. Maybe now they'll actually remember important dates. My 31st birthday is coming up in a few months. I've already gotten messages from multiple family members asking what I want to do, making sure I know they have it marked on their calendars. It's nice, but also sad that it took forgetting my 30th for them to care. Birthdays really aren't a big deal in the grand scheme of things. But being forgotten by your entire family on a milestone birthday, that sticks with you. I don't think I'll ever fully get over it, and I don't think they'll ever fully forgive themselves. Let's move on to the next one. Homeowners associations are the bane of many homeowners' existence, and mine proved to be just as petty and ridiculous as the horror stories you hear online. This saga lasted 6 months and tested every ounce of my patience. I bought a house in a neighborhood with an HOA about 3 years ago. The HOA fees weren't too bad, and the rules seemed reasonable when I read through them. Grass had to be maintained, no crazy paint colors, no parking RVs on the street, normal stuff. I figured I could live with that. For the first 2 years, everything was fine. I followed the rules, paid my fees, and had no issues. Then the HOA got new board members. One of them, let's call her Patricia, was a retired woman with apparently nothing better to do than patrol the neighborhood looking for violations. I first heard from Patricia when I got a letter in the mail saying I was in violation of HOA rules for having an unapproved structure in my backyard. I was confused because I hadn't built anything. I called the HOA office, and they explained that someone had reported a structure in my yard that wasn't approved by the Architectural Review Committee. I went into my backyard to figure out what they were talking about. The only thing I could think of was my daughter's playhouse. It's one of those plastic playhouses you buy from a toy store, maybe 4 feet tall, bright pink. My daughter had gotten it for her birthday, and we'd assembled it in the backyard. It never occurred to me that a child's toy would need HOA approval. I wrote back to the HOA explaining that it was a children's playhouse, not a permanent structure, and therefore shouldn't require approval. They responded saying that according to the HOA bylaws, any freestanding structure required approval, regardless of its purpose. They gave me 30 days to either get approval or remove it, or face a fine of $100 per day. $100 per day. For a plastic playhouse. I decided to go through the approval process. I filled out the architectural review application, attached photos of the playhouse, and submitted it. The application fee was $150. A few weeks later, I got a response. Denied. The reason, the playhouse was not aesthetically consistent with the neighborhood character. It's a pink plastic playhouse in my fenced backyard. You can barely see it from the street, but apparently it didn't fit the neighborhood character. I appealed the decision. I wrote a detailed letter explaining that the playhouse was a temporary children's toy, that it was barely visible from the street, and that denying it served no purpose other than to be petty. I attached photos showing how hidden it was behind the fence. I even included testimonials from my neighbors saying they had no problem with the playhouse. The appeal was denied. I was told to remove the playhouse within 15 days or start facing daily fines. At this point, I'd spent $150 on the application fees and countless hours dealing with this nonsense. I was furious, so I did some research. I read through the entire HOA bylaws, all 80 pages. Buried in there was a clause saying that temporary seasonal decorations and children's play equipment were exempt from the architectural review process. The playhouse was literally children's play equipment. I'd found the loophole. I sent a certified letter to the HOA citing the specific bylaw and demanding they rescind the violation notice. They responded saying that clause only applied to equipment that was easily movable, and the playhouse, because it was assembled with screws, wasn't easily movable. This was ridiculous. The playhouse could be disassembled in 20 minutes. I hired a lawyer. Cost me $500 for a consultation and a strongly worded letter, but it was worth it. The lawyer pointed out that the HOA was selectively enforcing bylaws and that other homes in the neighborhood had similar play equipment without violations. He threatened legal action if they continued to pursue the matter. The HOA backed down. They sent a letter saying they were withdrawing the violation notice and refunding my application fee. They also included a passive-aggressive paragraph about how homeowners should strive to maintain the community's high standards. I framed that letter, but I wasn't done. I was so annoyed by the whole experience that I ran for a position on the HOA board in the next election. I campaigned on a platform of common sense and less petty enforcement. I won, probably because I wasn't the only person Patricia had harassed. Once I was on the board, I worked with other members to revise some of the more ridiculous rules and rein in the overzealous enforcement. We clarified that children's play equipment didn't need approval. We reduced fines for minor violations. We created an appeals process that was actually fair. Patricia tried to fight every change, but she was outvoted. She eventually resigned from the board in frustration, citing that the rest of us were letting the neighborhood go downhill. The neighborhood did not, in fact, go downhill. It just became a place where people could have pink playhouses for their kids without facing $100 daily fines. The playhouse is still in my backyard. My daughter has mostly outgrown it, but I'm keeping it up out of spite at this point. Every time I see it, I'm reminded that sometimes you have to fight back against petty tyrants, even if it's over something as small as a plastic playhouse. And now, for the final story of the night. I'm really into eating healthy and supporting local businesses, which is why I was a regular at my local farmer's market. Every Saturday morning, I go and buy produce from various vendors, but my favorite was this one guy who sold organic, locally grown vegetables. Let's call him Frank. Frank's stand was always popular. He had beautiful produce, heirloom tomatoes, colorful peppers, leafy greens that looked perfect. He'd talk about his farm, how he used sustainable practices, how everything was grown without pesticides. People loved him. His prices were higher than other vendors, but you were paying for quality and supporting a local organic farmer, or so we thought. I'd been buying from Frank for about a year when something weird happened. I was at the grocery store one day and I saw Frank shopping. It's not weird by itself, farmers shop too, but he was loading his cart with produce. A lot of produce, like multiple flats of tomatoes, boxes of peppers, bags of lettuce, way more than one person would need for personal use. I didn't think too much of it at the time, but it stuck in my mind. The next Saturday at the farmer's market, I looked more closely at Frank's produce. Some of the tomatoes had those little stickers on them that grocery stores use. Frank had missed a few when he was removing them. I picked up a pepper and looked at it. It looked exactly like the ones I'd seen at the grocery store. Same variety, same size, same packaging style. I started to get suspicious. The following week, I went to the grocery store early Saturday morning before the farmer's market opened. I took photos of the produce, especially the heirloom tomatoes and specialty peppers. Then, I went to the farmer's market and compared. They were identical, same everything. Frank was buying produce from the grocery store and reselling it at the farmer's market as his own organic, locally grown produce. I wasn't sure what to do with this information. Part of me wanted to confront Frank directly, but another part of me wanted more proof. So I did some investigating. I looked up Frank's farm address, which was listed on his vendor sign. I drove out there one day. The address was a residential property with a small yard. No farm, no greenhouse, no garden beyond some decorative flowers. I checked with the county to see if Frank had a business license for a farm. He didn't. I checked with the organizations that certify organic farms. Frank's farm wasn't registered with any of them. Armed with this evidence, I reported Frank to the farmers market organizers. I showed them the photos, the address, the business license information. They were shocked. They told me they'd investigate and get back to me. The next week, Frank's stand was gone. The market organizers had confronted him, and he'd admitted to the fraud. He'd been buying conventional produce from grocery stores, removing the stickers, and selling it as organic and locally grown for nearly 2 years. He'd made tens of thousands of dollars doing this. The market organizers were mortified. They sent out an email to all the market's regular customers, explaining what had happened and apologizing. They also tightened their vendor vetting process, requiring proof of farm locations, business licenses, and organic certifications. Some customers were angry at me for ruining Frank's business. They said I should have minded my own business, that everyone knew farmers market produce was overpriced anyway. But most people were grateful. They'd been paying premium prices for what they thought was organic local produce, when it was really just regular grocery store vegetables marked up 200%. I felt bad for the people who'd been fooled, including myself. I'd spent probably $2,000 over the course of a year at Frank's stand, paying premium prices for a lie. But I also felt good about exposing the fraud. Other vendors at the market, the ones who were actually growing their own produce and following organic practices, deserved customers who were making informed choices. Frank tried to set up at other farmers' markets in nearby towns, but word spread quickly. Last I heard, he'd given up and moved out of the area. The farmers' market, where he'd operated, offered all his former customers vouchers to use at other vendors' stands, which was a nice gesture. The whole experience made me more skeptical about claims vendors make. Now when I shop at farmers' markets, I ask questions. Where's your farm? Can I visit it? How do you handle pests without pesticides? A real farmer can answer these questions easily. A fraud like Frank can't. It also taught me to trust my instincts. When I saw Frank at the grocery store loading up on produce, I knew something was off. I could have ignored that feeling and kept buying from him, but I didn't. And because I investigated, a lot of other people didn't keep getting ripped off. And that's it for this video. Thank you for listening.